Senior homes are going to be more expensive. This company's going to file for bankruptcy. Man, buying these YouTube channels and just spamming ads on it ain't a good idea, right? Doing what Robert Kiyosaki is doing, right? Leveraging loans.
Oh, my nest egg. Oh, what am I gonna do? Oh, I shouldn't have put my money in all those options.
Well, you know what? Can't feel sorry for people. Honestly, you should put your money in the S&P 500. If you do any high-risk investment, it's a gamble, and if you lose money, you deserved it.
So, is private equity
that's loud.
collapsing yet? Late last week, the industry publicly reported its second largest loss ever. Private credit markets that finance all the debt-fueled speculation have seen massive withdrawals over liquidity concerns. A Bain Capital European loan tranche defaulted for the first time since 2008. Investor payouts have slowed to a multi-decade low, also not seen since the global financial crisis. People can't pull their money out fast enough. The few public assets that we do have information on are down by as much as 30% at the same time the broader market is up by the same amount. And the number of unsold companies acquired by these firms has ballooned to over 32,000. It clearly doesn't sound great, but
well, this happens, right? Companies that just want to buy companies, or I'm sorry, investment firms want to buy companies and then they don't do anything with those companies. There's no direct management to fix the problem. So what ends up happening is the company starts to fail and they lose their value, right? And that's why the companies that are privately owned by individuals like Elon Musk and some other private fucking company, these people are making more money, or people have more faith in those stocks or those companies, so they buy more, they put more money into those stocks and those prices go up, while Johnson & Johnson or these like major old school name brand stuff that are bought out by investment firms are dying.
At the same time, last year the industry supposedly had its second best year ever, which kind of makes me look like a bit of an idiot, right? Private equity firms made almost $1 trillion in new acquisitions and, perhaps more importantly, sold over $700 billion worth of businesses, which was only ever surpassed by 2021 when interest rates were significantly cheaper. But this does raise the obvious question of, how can both of these reports be true at the same time? Were the naysayers, myself included, just wrong about this industry, or was 2025 something of a going out of business sale?
70% of the nation's nursing homes are now owned by for-profit companies.
Private equity.
God damn, that sucks. That means senior homes are going to be more expensive. They're going to have to go to those free ones. I know someone that lost all their money from gambling, kind of off topic, but she had to go to one of these free senior homes where they take all your retirement and they just take care of you, and they just feed you like 3 meals a day, and they give you a roommate. Right? You cannot have your own room. Right? It's kind of shitty. It's almost as bad as prison, but people couldn't afford their own private retirement of a room for a private retirement home, right? Because that shit's expensive now. Now that like all these investment firms, they buy up all these retirement homes, raise the prices, and make more money. And then because those are expensive, right? Because those retirement homes are expensive, so will the privately owned retirement homes. Those are going to be also expensive as well. They all pretty much match each other on price.
Getting into dentistry, how many losses there are so far throughout the private equity and private credit spaces?
Over time, if a liquidity issue is extended, it can turn into a credit issue.
Cascade Capital Group and its affiliate Legacy Healthcare bought the nursing home.
A group led by Blackstone has agreed to take control of software group Medallia from Thoma Bravo in a deal that will cement one of the largest wipeouts in the history.
Okay, so
what are they going to do with software? Let's be real.
In the past, mostly because of the perverse incentives it gives financiers to inshitify products, lay off workers, and separate themselves from the consequences. But also partially because it's just not a good business model. It's structured from the ground up to slowly eat itself while paying out huge bonuses for the privilege. So yeah. Late last month, Thoma Bravo, a major private equity firm, publicly announced the industry's second biggest loss ever. Medallia was, and still is, a profitable, albeit boring business that makes software to track consumer feedback from online reviews and those little faces you poke when leaving a shop. You know how companies are always collecting your data from your smart fridge for some reason?
Yep.
Medallia is one of the programs they feed that data into to try to sell you stuff more. Tomo Bravo acquired this business using a combination of their
I have that on my
investors' money
phone.
and an additional estimated $1.8 billion in private credit loans coming from other big names in the space like KKR, Apollo, and Blackstone. After the acquisition, the company took on even more debt, and then when interest rates rose, it took on more debt again to maintain its interest.
It's a ghost company. It's a company that's being used to collect debt, and then that debt is going to be used to create an apparatus that makes money for another company. This company is going to file for bankruptcy, and then the other company that like Pharma Bravo is going to be making all the money. Basically, Pharma Bravo is getting revenue for a project that's being done by that company, Medallia. Pretty smart business move. I don't know if it's legal. Like, I'm pretty sure there's some loopholes or like some technicality that you can abuse. I'm not too sure about corporate accounting or law.
Payments. As a shock to absolutely nobody, this was not sustainable, and just over a week ago, it was announced that the company would be handed over to its debtors and that the original private equity firm in this whole arrangement would recognize a loss for the full $5 billion it had initially invested. Now, the weird part is that the Medallia business itself is still profitable.
Yeah.
It still has a long
It's a
list of
really
clients,
good business.
And if it wasn't for all of the debt that
Wait, it's kind of like theft, but legal. Legal theft. They take your data and they sell it to advertisers like Google.
private equity company had piled on,
That's
it,
why
it would still be making a decent
If you
amount of
talk
money.
about Monster
Total Bravo
Energy,
also
you'll get
wasn't
ads for
poor on
Monster
cash.
Energy on
They could have
Facebook.
just paid off this debt and kept the company, but they instead just decided to write it off entirely and hand the keys over to their lenders to make it their problem. This is literally the equivalent of someone putting 80% down on an investment property that is cash flow positive, borrowing 20% to complete the purchase, and then letting the bank foreclose on the house as soon as interest rates went up on their adjustable rate mortgage. It sounds dumb, but it does kind of go to show that this industry isn't really behaving what you might call normally at the moment. And there are 3 reasons why stuff like this is happening at the same time that, on the surface at least, business is as good as ever. The first reason is that 2025 was a little bit of a rush for the exits. On the top line, the year was the second biggest for private equity ever. Exit value hit $717 billion, which is up 47% on 2024. And that sounds very impressive. But when you look at how that number was achieved, there are some problems. Deal count actually fell 6% to 3,018 total exits, which meant this growth was achieved by pushing the average deal size to a record $1.2 billion. And that average is being dragged up by a handful of absolutely enormous transactions. Just 13 of those sales accounted for almost a third of all transactions in total, and without them, the industry would indeed still be shrinking. The largest of these deals was the $55 billion Electronic Arts take private, led by the Saudi Public Investment Fund, which, to be clear,
Saudi. Oh shit, Saudi.
was a sovereign wealth fund buying a video game company with the assistance of some private equity partners. A lot of the small to middle market companies that have sort of defined this industry, like the dentist offices, the plumbing companies, the regional healthcare chains, the YouTube channels, those are still struggling to find buyers. 2025 was also the first year.
Yeah, I think these investment firms are finally learning that, oh man, buying these YouTube channels and just spamming ads on it ain't a good idea, right? I mean, for example, look at Machinima. Machinima used to be big. It was the biggest gaming channel ever. They didn't only took over gaming, they also try to take like other regular channels as well. I think they got PewDiePie for a while, and they got some like Asian YouTube channel, like the JK whatever JK Films people. They try to recruit them as well, and they try to recruit like a bunch of normal YouTubers. They're just trying to max out on revenue. But then I think the owner decided to use Machinima to advertise non-stop. All the content was gone. There was no more content. They were like, oh yeah, we're so high up there right now, we could just advertise and make a bunch of money. And well, yeah, they did, but it died. It just died. And then it kind of shows that a channel really doesn't have a purpose to live, or will not live, if you just use it to milk money. It needs to have the apparatus. It needs to have the driver. And I think investment firms are starting to realize that if you were to buy, for example, you were to buy Honda, right, the car company, And then, you don't focus on making cars anymore. You just keep the same old 2026 model, like the 11th generation model, and you just throw a bunch of ads into it, right? Oh yeah, customer like Honda Civics. Let's just keep pumping out these cars, and then let's just keep throwing ads on it and make money from the advertising. Customers are going to be annoyed at like dealing with ads in their car. They're not going to buy the car anymore, and there's no more improvement anymore, right? The car is not evolving, so customers are going to stop buying Honda Civics, right? Surprise, surprise. Now investment people are noticing this. These people are good investors, but when they try to run businesses, it dies. It simply dies. And by the way, my channel involves making fun of adults. So if you like seeing me shit on adults, subscribe and like.
Your interest rates came down meaningfully, which allowed a lot of funds to borrow again to shuffle their inventory of companies around. Again, this really is just someone flipping real estate investments. Even if they can manage their interest payments, selling activity tends to pick up when interest rates are lower because sellers know that buyers can borrow more to fund their purchases. The only difference is that instead of trading people's homes back and forth, they are trading people's livelihoods. On the almighty Excel spreadsheet, they are both just cash flow generating assets that are easy to get loans on. Anyway, another big factor was that the regulatory environment also
put a down payment on a home, sorta own the house, and then get a loan to pay off that house, and take the loan money and let the house die. Let the bank have the house afterwards. It's not a bad business idea. You're just doing what Robert Kiyosaki is doing, right? Leveraging loans.
Softened considerably. The FTC restarted early termination of merger reviews and granted over 100 requests by mid-2025. The new chairman of the commission, Andrew Ferguson, publicly said the agency must get out of the way quickly. So basically, in 2025, for the first time in 3 years, funds had cheaper money and less regulatory friction. And a lot of them saw this as their chance to offload their winners and make major acquisitions while the window was open. Now, to play devil's advocate a bit, this was probably the correct call for these investment firms. But the big rush for the exit did create the image of activity that was really just making up for lost time. Even before the recent news, there were some, inconvenient details underneath. The one metric that was not making up for lost time was realized profits. Actualized payments back to investors who, theoretically want a return on their investments remained extremely low. Distributions as a percentage of net asset value stayed flat at 14% in 2025, a level not seen since 2008 and 2009 during the actual global financial crisis. And this was back at a time when the industry was considerably smaller overall, and they have now lagged historical averages for 4 straight years running, which is a new record for the modern PE industry. So the industry was reporting huge exit values, while barely paying anyone back. Now, maybe you could argue that all of this was getting reinvested, except that the number of new funds successfully raising capital has basically halved over the last 4 years. If the industry was really firing on all cylinders, this probably shouldn't be happening. A lot of that record-setting exit volume was also just private equity funds trading companies to other private equity funds, which inflates both the acquisition number and the exit number simultaneously. This always happens a bit, but 2025 saw a massive uptick. Secondary transactions hit a record $226 billion, with continuation vehicles alone reaching $115 billion, up 53% on the prior year. Now, like a lot of things in this industry, that probably needs a bit of de-jargoning. Private equity funds are supposed to have finite lives, usually 10 to 12 years. During that time, a private equity firm will launch the fund, market it to investors, raise money, buy assets, improve them, flip them for a profit, and then distribute the profits out to investors. Again, in theory. If this goes well, the firm can usually launch multiple different funds all at the same time each with their own vintage.
Basically, they buy a company, do what's good for the company, and the company value goes up, and they sell it. It's kind of like, I'll explain it in a way, like cars, right? You buy a used car from Craigslist. You clean it up. You paint it, maybe change the cracked windows, and you decorate it, smooth out the bumps, and then you sell it for double the price. That's usually how flipping works, right? You flip a car for a higher income. You just for a higher revenue. You just make it look aesthetically better, right? You don't have to fix the engine or you don't have to fix the transmission if it has a problem. You just make it look better, and then you can actually double the price on flipping a cars. I noticed because a bunch of my friends did this and they made decent money doing it. That's what investment firms do normally, but now I think what he's gonna say is that these investment companies or don't know or don't want to go through the ordeal of improving the value of these companies, so this is where they lose money because they don't want to improve the value anymore. They're just too lazy.
Which is, again, just a douchey finance bro way of referring to the year the fund was launched. So to really stretch the lingo, the PE firm is the winery and the PE funds are the barrels, which are again supposed to be used up within a set time period. Now, that self-imposed time frame exists for a reason. In theory, it forces managers to actually sell their companies and realize returns, rather than just keeping a portfolio on the books, claiming it's worth billions, and charging a 2% management fee on that hypothetical number indefinitely.
Okay.
Again,
All right. So this is what their strategy is. It's like, we'll manage this company. We'll take 2% out of this company. We will pocket 2% of the revenue. And basically, they want royalty in the company by doing nothing.
In theory, it forces them to prove what their holdings are actually worth, which was also a part of the reason why 2025 saw such an uptick, because a lot of the vintages were expiring. But when there are just not that many buyers and the self-inflicted clock is ticking, it creates some perverse incentives. The industry has started reluctantly building workarounds. Continuation vehicles are where a fund sells a company to a new fund run by the same manager. Evergreen funds that never technically expire, and net asset value loans where funds borrow against their own reported portfolio values to pay distributions to investors in the meantime. It's more extend and pretend that has sort of been enabled by slightly lower rates and much looser oversight. And look, I'm trying to be more
Fair.
Maybe this is all to say that the industry wasn't exactly dying. It was in the process of changing, although not necessarily.
Yeah, people are getting smarter. People are getting more wise. They are starting to realize that that these private equity companies that own these other companies, they don't increase the value of these companies. They just hold on to it and they try to find a buyer dumb enough to pay a premium for these companies. Yeah, just like how my car analogy is, right? You buy a shitty car, right? But instead of making it look better, you do nothing at all, and you just try to find a buyer dumb enough to pay double the price for it without cleaning the car at all. They just don't want to improve the value of the company. They just want to straight up leave it alone, let it sit in the back of their shit, and hopefully someone will come and say, hey, I want to buy that piece of garbage from you for double the value of what you claim it is, for the value that you claim it is. You bought it for $1 billion, and now you're offering it to me for $2 billion? Hell yeah, I want to buy it now. It makes no sense, right? I mean, people back then were dumb enough to buy these companies, these dying companies, but now people are getting smarter.
For the better. But that was 2025. 2026 is shaping up to be a very different year. So it's time to learn how money works to find out if private equity can just go ahead and collapse already. This video is sponsored by Monarch.
Private equity
Monarch
is
a
evil.
private ad-free personal.
I have a personal hatred for private equity, but don't get me wrong, I think what they're doing is right for themselves. Like, they want to benefit themselves. Their main priority is profit. I don't blame them for what they're doing, but whatever they're doing fucks with my life, because private equity buy real estates. And the reason why rent is like $3,000 for like a 2-bedroom apartment is because these private equities are buying up all the real estate and they are just increasing the price. They're skyrocketing the price. And then, I mean, if you look at cities like New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Austin, there's a bunch of vacant places. Lots of vacant places because the rent for these places are egregious. No one will pay for it. No one can afford to pay for it. That's why there's a bunch of empty spaces in these big cities, and it's space that could have been well used, but it can't be used because it's overpriced. thanks to these private equity firms.
A finance platform that brings all your accounts into one clean dashboard. It automatically tracks your spending, and make or no. I started using Monarch for my expense, me pending returns for you, where like how much your action makes progress and the QR code on player, an extremely broad term. All it really means is any investment not listed on public stock markets. Typically, this means private non-listed companies, but these days it more broadly means anything from non-listed real estate investments all the way to things like music royalties and even video game IP. If there is something that generates a cash flow, there will probably be a PE firm there to speculate on it. Normally, when people talk about private equity, particularly in the context of the harm it does, they are talking about buyout funds.
Yep,
These are the ones that go and acquire local businesses, load them up with debt, try to cut costs, and flip them for a profit a few years later.
Yeah, let's take this company, put it as collateral to borrow money, right? And now the debt is on this company that we bought. Now let's sell this company that is under a huge amount of debt.
This kind of private equity is indeed not doing well. The number of new funds raising money in the space has effectively halved. They have underperformed the regular stock market over the last several years, and they are running out of small to medium businesses willing to sell. So the actual growth in PE broadly has mostly come from somewhere else entirely. Large funds buying large companies, often by specifically taking them off the stock market in a process called going private, which, as you might have been able to piece together, is the opposite of going public. That $55 billion EA deal is an extreme example, but the trend is much broader than that. Wealthy individuals and institutions already own most of the stock market, and these same groups are allowed to invest in private equity.
Smart boomers.
In the past, I have often repeated the statistic that the top 10% of households own 93% of the stock market. That is actually not true anymore. Today, it's down to only about 87%.
Oh, okay.
The top 1% has also fallen from controlling 52 to 50%. Now, on the surface, this might look like a step in the right direction, making asset ownership more equitable, even if it is still very top-heavy. In reality, what has actually happened is that these groups have just transitioned into private markets that regular investors don't have access to. If you look at all financial assets, including these gated private markets, it is in fact more concentrated than ever. So for a lot of companies, the only real reason to go public anymore is if there's enough retail hype around the business to get them a better price than they could negotiate privately. A lot of companies have figured out it's just easier to sell in private markets. They can avoid the regulatory overhead of being publicly listed and still raise the same amount of money from the same institutional investors anyway. Which means that a lot of PE funds have basically become glorified index funds filled with boring, conservative businesses that would have previously gone onto the S&P 500 or the Russell 2000. Now, that's probably not great for the average retail investor, because it means that more of the public stock market is going to be filled with either mega-cap tech companies that already have huge index weights, or companies that are only going public because they know retail hype will get them better pricing than they could in private markets.
Okay.
But another way, if a company could sell itself for a higher price to sophisticated institutional investors who spend months doing due diligence, there should probably be a pretty good reason why they'd choose to instead sell that valuable asset to you. Major institutional investors are naturally wary of stretched valuations in mega-cap tech, so if they want broad exposure to companies outside of that space, private markets have kind of become the place to do it. And well, even if they do want the exposure, it's also worth pointing out that a huge amount of recent deal value in PE has come from financing data center construction or buying the land to build them on, which helped drive up the headline numbers, but is again not really what most people picture when they hear private equity. So if we are being generous, my predictions of their imminent demise had been greatly exaggerated, outside of one particular niche. It has instead mostly been replaced with a private stock market for rich people as opposed to the, well, public stock market for rich people. The traditional leveraged buyout model is shrinking and struggling. It sounds good, but it gets better. But even for the investors on the inside, there's still a growing problem. A lot of the money that made all of this possible is starting to dry up. We have already made a video about it, but in brief, private credit funds stepped into the gap left by banks after 2008, offering risk.
Yeah, I think banks are starting to realize that these private equity firms, you should just not lend money to them. Don't lend money to these private equity firms. Right? That's why if you look at Citigroup, Bank of America, I don't know about JP Morgan, but I know that Citigroup and Bank of America, their stock markets are slowly climbing because they're not lending money to these sewer snakes anymore. Just look at the stock market. I think Bank of America is $60 and Citibank is at 120. I remember last I looked at it was like $50. I mean, previously I was looking at it, it was like 50 or $40. Now it's 120 something, maybe higher. I don't know. I don't remember. But banks are starting to realize the bullshit that these private equity firms pull, and now they don't put up with it anymore. No, we're not giving you a loan. Fuck you guys. And now, guess what? Their value is going up. They're making money.
But higher interest rate loans to companies that couldn't get traditional financing. And for a while, that worked well, especially when rates were lower. But when rates went up and stayed up, a lot of these borrowers found themselves stacking new debt on top of old debt just to keep up with their interest payments. Exactly what happened with Medallia. A lot of these private credit loans were packaged into CLOs, collateral loan obligations, which is basically the same concept as the collateralized debt obligations from 2008, except instead of home loans underneath them, they're backed by corporate debt. Ooh. Now, just a few weeks ago, a CLL tranche managed by Bain Capital defaulted for the first time in Europe since the global financial crisis. Now, to be fair, a junior CLO tranche defaulting is literally what the risk structure is designed for. The junior tranches absorb losses so their senior tranches stay protected. That is the whole point. But it also does sound familiar, right? Fitch has suggested this might not stay isolated, and that this could be the first of a small cluster rather than a one-off. On the retail side, investors have been trying to pull their money out of private credit funds about as fast as their agreements will allow. In Q1 2026, 5 of the 6 major private credit funds gated investor withdrawals to effectively stop the private equivalent of a run on the bank. Non-listed BDCs returned about $7 billion to investors during the quarter while only raising $5 billion, marking the first time these private credit vehicles saw more money going out than coming in. Across the entire industry in the first half of 2026, deal volume dropped 34% compared to 2025, with the total number of PE transactions down 67%. Which, in my defense, means I wasn't wrong about the industry so much as I was wrong about the timing, which I guess is basically the same thing. Anyway, there are 2 other external variables that have contributed to this boom and bust. The first is that a lot of funding for these private markets came from countries in the Persian Gulf. In the past, they had been using their oil revenue to make major acquisitions across a range of industries. But obviously, this year their revenue has been cut off, so this particular source of new funding has been a lot slower on top of an already shrinking market. The second thing is that one of the biggest target industries for broader private equity has been having its own problems. Over the past decade, PE firms really liked software as a service businesses because they were relatively capital light and they worked well when rolled up together with other similar companies.
Low maintenance business model. SaaS, software as a service, super low maintenance. I actually know a guy that built a software on his own and he is making bank, and the company is only ran by one guy, and that is himself. Smart people. That's why I think SaaS is like one of the best business models if you could pull it off. It is super low maintenance and it is super high profit if you can hit the market correctly.
Is to expand their product suites. So instead of
it's really hard though, you need to be very smart.
They could become a portfolio of companies selling in one solution, mostly as big software packages target.
Adobe is not PE owned. This is just an example of suite offering. Okay, yeah. Really? Adobe is not owned by a PE? I just realized that. But I do know that Adobe has some pretty fucked up business models, right? Like they try to trick you into buying their annual subscription instead of their monthly subscription, and they make you lose like $800 immediately off the rip.
At other businesses. Again, to use the recent example, Thoma Bravo was one of the biggest players in this space, and Medallia was just one of the dozens of similar holdings they had previously acquired. But 2026 has not been a kind year for SaaS companies. A lot of businesses have started to believe they can now vibe code workable alternatives to the enterprise software they've been paying annual subscriptions for. And even if that's not actually true for most companies yet, investors think it is. And that's what matters for valuations. The industry is calling it the SaaSpocalypse. Roughly $1 trillion in aggregate SaaS market capitalization was erased in Q1 of 2026 alone. The median public SaaS company revenue multiple fell from 6.2x at the end of 2024 to 3.3x by March 2026. Of course, private companies don't get constantly updated pricing information until they are forced to sell or be foreclosed on. Secondary market buyers are now demanding discounts of 20% or more to take SaaS-heavy PE portfolios.
It's so crazy. The more I am having such a hard time keeping up with this video because I learned so much already and I'm trying to connect all the dots together at the same time. Like the more you know, the harder it is to learn. It's actually kind of crazy like how all this information is being spooned to me. And I'm like having a hard time remembering everything.
Portfolios off managers' hands, up from around 5% just a few weeks before that. This is why Thoma Bravo decided to hand Medallia over to its creditors. In theory, it had $5 billion in equity, but after these adjustments, it was underwater on its loans, even with a very modest leverage ratio. So it just made more sense to walk away and record the loss.
Yep.
Bravo's general partner, Mr. Bravo himself, said at a conference shortly after, "We were moving really fast during that time. We underwrote really fast growth, and in hindsight, we paid too much because that growth didn't materialize." Now, I know that this is just one example, but it is a big one, and probably the first of many to be exposed pantsless as the tide goes out. According to an industry report from Oliver Wyman, 80% of PE buyers now cite AI-driven commoditization as the #1 risk to SaaS valuations.
Oh,
now, the
yeah?
other thing about all
Dude, well, yeah, because AI is amazing. AI is one of the best things that has been invented. Dude, I'm not a coder, and even I can build an app with AI. Just think how crazy that is.
all of this is that we genuinely don't know how good or bad things really are. Yet. The private credit industry is private. Disclosures are few and far between. We can only estimate what's actually going on based on the rare moments things go so publicly wrong that they become impossible to hide, or from the handful of metrics that do get reported. Now, to be fair, private equity becoming a boring walled garden of equally boring companies only accessible to accredited investors would actually be preferable to the old model of leveraged buyout funds strip mining local businesses. But more broadly, the market can stay irrational longer than any fund can stay solvent, or some dumb YouTuber can maintain the.
Yeah, this is why banks refuse to lend money to these companies that are owned by private equities. Back in 2008, there's a situation where banks keep lending money to people, and the banks was down under. They were gonna foreclose. Oh no, I don't know what's called foreclose, but these banks were about to go bankrupt. But the government bailed them out. The government gave them money, right? So they don't go bankrupt for their own mistakes, right? Basically, the government gave our tax dollars to these banks so they don't die from their own mistake. And to be fair, I think it's not a completely bad move. If these banks were to die, it would be panic for everyone because a bunch of people have money in the bank. And yes, you have the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, where they compensate you for $250,000 that is lost. But, you know, just like any insurance company, they will argue and bicker with you until you give up and you won't get your money back. And not to mention, the FDIC is the government. Do you know how hard it is to argue against the government? The government makes the rules. They can literally adjust the rules to their advantage as much as they want. So it kind of makes sense why they save the banks now. But then I think with this administration, I don't think Donald Trump will help these banks if they fuck up. And I think banks learned their lesson. Like, okay, we shouldn't lend our money to people that will never pay us back. So that's why banks are not loaning any money to these companies owned by private equity, which is why these PEs are losing money, right? Not only are they not getting as much money from loans as they used to, they still get it, but they're not getting as much as they used to, and also people are getting smarter. They realize that buying a dead company is a bad idea. Go figures.
Ego. But there is one element to this that won't wait around. We've mentioned it briefly, but go and watch this video next to find out how private credit might bring the find out stage sooner than we expected. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how money works.
Yep, that's how money works, right? It's all a bunch of manipulation and all about finding suckers with a lot of money. There's like this whole trend about boomers talking about how AI is the next big thing. AI, yeah, it is the next big thing, but then boomers that keep preaching about how great it is, they don't know what AI is, essentially. They really don't know what AI is. There's a shoe company that said, we're going AI. And then all of a sudden, all these idiot boomers with a lot of money start investing in this shoe company. Boom. The shoe company valuation went up by 300%. So these rich boomers don't know much about AI. They just keep thinking, oh, it's the next big thing. It is, but it's also a scam as well if you're not careful. You can get scammed very easily and buy a bunch of junk stock if you just buy something for the sole reason of it having AI slapped on it. But you know what? I see it as a good thing, these scams. It's a way for young people to take the money back from the old. That's how I see it, right? Boomers broke that unwritten rule of leaving the world a better place for the next generation by fucking up the real estate, fucking up the economy, fucking up the stock market. I see it as a way for young people to take money back from, boomers, and it's what they get for being so clueless, right? They become so complacent in enjoying their wealth. They totally forgot that they need to learn about the new world and not get scammed by AI businessmen,